This is the first update of the 8-week speed training program. I'm 2 weeks in and I'm going to go through what I've learned so far. First thing I've noticed, which is always really common when starting out training again, is planning in advance and getting the sessions done on a weekly basis. It takes planning your time, and often that can be quite tricky if you've got a busy lifestyle. Getting back into that routine again has been a little bit difficult, but I'm starting to see that becoming easier and easier. Secondly, although obviously we know the benefits of exercise and training, there's often been a little bit more carryover fatigue. So getting my nutrition right, my hydration right on a daily basis to make sure I'm recovering at the best. Finally, delayed onset of muscular soreness, also known as DOMS, one of the most common symptoms of training, especially when new to a program and new to new exercises. The intensity levels are not particularly high for me in this program, so the DOMS aren't severe, but obviously with the body not being used to it, I'm still experiencing some muscular soreness. So just managing that, managing my training, managing my recovery to kind of reduce all those symptoms and get back into that routine. Those first 2 weeks are essential to that, and also they don't have to be perfect. I'm noticing just getting back into that kind of flow is all I'm looking for. So in this video, I'm going to go through the session. I'm going to talk about some of the exercises, what I've noticed for myself personally, what's felt physically difficult, or where maybe a little bit harder compared to what I imagined, which is then showing something up and something I've had to then focus on a little bit more quality, a little bit longer rest periods to make sure that I'm getting the most out of each session and each exercise. So with a mobility routine, the first exercise through the hip, the shin box, a key thing that I noticed for me personally is on the right side I feel this stretch predominantly through the glute muscle, which I would expect to with my front hip in external rotation, but through the left side I get a much more of a stretch through kind of the hamstring and the groin area, and that can be quite common when there's a little bit of a weakness in that side. It's not so much a mobility issue but more kind of a strength issue that's showing up, and through imbalance or lack of strength between left and right, and something that will probably show up in future exercises, especially the mobility exercises that I'm going to talk through as we go. With this particular mobility exercise, it's not one that I feel I'm getting as much of a stretch and movement out of compared to some of the others. So for me, I'm going to now focus with this exercise. I'm going to do one less set in my routine of this particular exercise. There's no point in doing something if you don't get lots from it with mobility and flexibility exercises. With this exercise, I'm definitely feeling that through the hamstring again, like with the shin box, but because I'm elevated, I can put more of my body mass into my hip. I can actually get a little bit more activation through that glute and into that external rotation that I'm looking for predominantly. So this actually feels like a bit of a greater stretch. So with this one, as I'm moving through my left hip, turning internally into my hip joint, I can feel quite a lot of engagement and activation through that hamstring again, which is a perfect example of how that strength and stability, how my body's trying to find stability to post into that left leg and turn and mobilize around the hip joint. So although this is great for a bit more range of motion, I certainly need to get some strength through those hamstring muscles to help utilize that range of motion a little bit more dynamically in the golf swing. It'd be interesting to see how that changes in the golf swing, where a little bit of my tendency is to slide through the ball very laterally, and that obviously is engaging a lot of the hamstring strength rather than pushing out the floor as much. So this is a key area I really need to develop from a physical standpoint that will have some link and crossover to my biomechanics. So I'm really pleased to be back doing this exercise, the hip hinge, because essentially this is loading the hamstrings and stretching them at end range of motion, which, as I've talked about, the hip mobility, especially on my left side, I need to get more strength back into those hamstring muscles. Moving back to just a dumbbell variation, the basics really help just get the pattern nailed in and feel that stretch as I'm at the bottom. As someone who has naturally quite short hamstrings, this movement pattern is perfect for me to develop and load up over time. I'm starting quite lightweight, certainly for the first set, to almost use as a warm kind of stretch. Push-ups for me, because I have a little bit of a long-term shoulder issue that also relates to my golf swing, which I will talk about more as we go. The actual push-up motion, if I get the right width for grip and just slow it down a little bit for me at this bottom position, is actually stretching out that front left pec. So that's actually out opening up my shoulder and my chest, which is really great for getting a little bit more strength, stability and endurance kicking back in there. Getting back into some jumping exercise has been great for improving that vertical force power. Obviously, we've not training strength, certainly in the lower half, for a little while. Power output just becomes that little bit harder, a little bit less inefficient. So just rebuilding those two areas back has been great. So for me, just staying springy and explosive and get that momentum and that feel back has been exactly what we need. That's the first 2 weeks of the speed training program wrapped up for me. I feel like there's been some decent progress, looking in the right areas, not trying to look at big changes in strength, power or speed. Sticking to the speed training principles, but I feel better every time I'm doing it. I feel like I'm moving better, feel fresher each time, feel a little bit more efficient. Been logging everything into the app, which has helped me measure my progress, how I'm increasing the weight, how I'm following the routine properly, and how I'm looking to move forward over these next 2 weeks. If you've been following along, let me know how you're getting on. Leave a comment, tell me how the exercises are going and whether your speed's increased.